I've been communicating like, hey, a lot of people write in with a lot of questions about reviews. And you're always like, I'm reviews editor. I'd like to be there to answer some of those questions, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I asked you to start, rather than sort of me dropping in for a question every now and then about reviews, to sort of hold back a stock of them, and then we can just sort of knock out a bunch of them in a dedicated segment here. Which
That's right.
You have been doing pretty much all year, right?
Yes. So I went back just through 2019 alone. These are the questions that people had about Game Informer's reviews and stuff like that. So we boiled it down to some of the very best. So if your email gets read here, not eligible for email of the week, but still an honor. And it's going to be a little bit of time travel involved here because 2019 has been quite the journey.
Oh, and it still makes the show better.
That's true,
So
unquestionably.
Mission accomplished there.
But it kind of sparked from last week when, the discussion came up of like, oh, you should post on the website some of your review tips. And eventually you're like, let's just have it on the podcast.
Yeah. Let's just talk about it. I don't think we'll run through like the full list of tips or whatever, but
What? Are you serious?
You want to?
Absolutely. Well, here we go. Chuck from Gorham, Maine.
Okay.
He says, hey, I've been writing comic reviews for a site called butwhythoughpodcast.com. There we go. Congratulations on the plug. For a few weeks, and my editor just sent me a preview code to review my first video game. I am both excited and nervous. Any pointers you can give a first-time video game reviewer? This is a tee-up, Joe, for you to hit a grand slam and just run down all of your bullet points of how to write a game review.
Okay, I have a bunch of them.
Please.
Can I explain some of them, or is it just rattle them out?
Of course.
Okay.
We're trying to convey information, whichever way you best want to do that.
I'm so bound by the rules. Okay, so thing number one, remember that reviews are an opinion. There isn't some like objective reality of what a game is, regardless of what some Metascore is going to tell you. And I don't think it serves the review that you're going to write. I don't think that is made better by trying to get at some sort of objective heart of it. It's just like all you can write about is your experience with the game.
It's as simple as, do you like your time playing this game or not?
Do you like this game? Why or why not?
Now to poke a hole in thing number one. I once heard somebody in the Game Informer office years and years ago say, like, I just hate this game, but I guess it's technically well made, so I guess it'll get a decent review. Is that an incorrect way to look at things in your mind?
I guess I would ask what decent review means in that case, because
I think it was probably 7.75.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know. I guess I personally wouldn't do that.
Mm-hmm.
I would say that kind of game, a game that is technically functional,
mm-hmm.
and not actively terrible, but just like not super fun.
Like just for a model, let's say Republic on iOS.
I didn't play that. I'm sorry. But I mean, like, I think a game that sort of falls into that space that is like generally like technically competent.
Yeah.
Does what it's like sets out to do, but what it sets out to do isn't particularly like ambitious or fun or good. That's something that scores in the like 6.5 to 7 range.
How do you factor that? I mean, what communications do you have with reviewers at Game Informer about when they run into situations like that where it's like, it's a good game, every time I played it, I was miserable.
I mean, I think a lot of that boils down to the text. And I think that this is something that, like, when you talk about reviews, and it tends to boil down a lot to discussions of the score, which is, a big part of reviews these days, and I understand it. But
is there text with reviews? But
the score does not exist in isolation. And ultimately, in my mind, like, the text is the review. The text is the important part. So as long as the text that you're writing matches up to the score that you're giving, I think that's correct.
Mm-hmm.
That's the way to do it. So in the case of the game you're talking about here, if the text of the review is technically the game functions, but this boss fight is terrible. This is so boring. I don't care about the story.
Right.
If suddenly the text of the review just weighs very negative, that's not a 7.75.
Right.
So then I would approach the reviewer and say, like, I should say, there is no dictation here in terms of what a score needs to be.
Yeah.
but I do demand that like the score and the text do align.
Of course.
So if someone writes a very negative text but gives it like a 7.75, I will go to the reviewer and say like something needs to change here. There's a misalignment. So you either drop your score to match your text, or you need to reconsider the things that you're talking about in the text. Like you need to emphasize some of the things you're more positive or enthusiastic about if you're absolutely set on giving it this score.
Right. And I mean, people are probably curious about the entire process. So the person writes the review and then looks at their own text and comes up with a score. It's not a matter of sending the text to you and then you say, well, this reads like an 8.35.
Right, exactly. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
How do you factor in? We're going to cover a lot of this stuff. There's a lot of questions, but I'm curious too.
Yeah. What
do you do when you review a game and you're just in a bad mood? You just got dumped and you have like a medium quality game. Isn't it hard to have that not affect your enjoyment of an experience that's just designed to entertain you?
Man, I don't know. I guess that I don't have a like chambered response to that one.
Okay.
That's tricky because like I generally speaking, I just take a break in those times.
Yeah.
But I've never run into a situation where it was like, actually.
Ooh.
This is interesting. So I guess I'm thinking about this now. I had finished playing, but had not finished writing the review Oninaki when the layoffs happened a couple months ago here.
Yes.
And so it's kind of what you're talking about.
Exactly that.
In that, like, but I mean, I had already played the game.
Right.
So it wasn't a question of like assessing whether or not I was currently having fun with it. As much as it is of like, like mentally that's a tough space to be in. And I just sort of like in the process of writing that, it's not like as I was playing the game, I did have a sense of what that game score was going to be and what the things in the review I was going to talk about. So it's not like suddenly like I'm mentally in a, worse place and then the worst parts emerge, right?
Yes. So
I just sort of, I don't know, I guess like sort of referred back to the way I was feeling before and like the sort of my opinions on the game during all of that stuff and just sort of tapped into that.
But what about people that were in the middle of reviewing a game when that happened? Don't you think that affects the mood and their overall enjoyment?
It could. Yeah. I mean, I can't say definitively one way or the other. I mean, I think it's weird to, I guess that sort of plays into the one official point I've given already is like a review that you write is reflective of your experience with a game. And if your experience with a game is tied into like some sort of external factors, I don't know how you like you just can't think your way out of that all the time.
Right. And
so,
I mean, everybody's professional enough to be able to separate that. It's not like they're blaming the game for something that happened, but like, I think it affects a mood,
Yeah. And I think you'll notice if you look at our site around, the weeks after that stuff, like we were not as good at hitting embargoes and stuff. I think we just needed some extra time and some extra space to really consider that stuff a little more carefully.
Right. Yeah. A similar note, let me keep poking holes here. Co-op buddies. If you're playing a co-op game with your best friend in the world for the review, won't you have a better time with the game than if you're playing with some random schmo?
Yeah, I suppose.
Case in point, Dead Space 3 review from Tim Turry.
Oh.
But it's true. Like, he's playing the game with his best buddy, and it's a style of game like Resident Evil 5 that he loves so much. Yeah. He gave the game a 9.75. It's like, that's high, but, I mean, that is his bread and butter.
Yeah, I mean, that ties into... You sort of unwittingly cracked into a much deeper thing there, too, though, I think. And that's like what kind of, how do you engineer the experience around playing a game for review, right?
And a lot of PR people would like to know.
Like, I guess another question would be, how big of a fan is the reviewer of this particular franchise? And
well, hang on, let's get right to it.
So that's another question that comes up somewhere in there too.
Alec Johnson from Madison, Wisconsin says Kim's, you tell this is old, Kim's Hot off the presses review for Kingdom Hearts 3 made me wonder how hard it is to review a game that is part of one of your favorite franchises. Do you worry that you'll have a hard time not inflating the score a little? Personally, I would have a hard time not going easy on an installment in the Civilization or Mass Effect franchises.
Yeah, and that's a tricky thing. I think it goes back to the point of like ultimately all you can lean on is your experience with it. And if you get too deep in your head about, okay, well, this is me as a fan who thinks this, but what does someone who's not a fan think of this?
Yeah.
That gets to be a problem. And then when it comes to actually assigning, like when I assign someone on a review, on two ends of a spectrum of thought there are the idea that, well, you should put fans on it because they are the most acquainted with that series. They know, they know what they're looking for. But then there's that danger of, is the score inflated at all? Then on the other end of the spectrum, are you going to put someone like, Berts on Zelda, who has been vocal for years about how he thinks that that's a little overrated, right? And then, if you put Berts on Zelda, are you technically getting a more like accurate or less inflated or whatever view of that? Or is that, I guess, like, who does that review serve? Of all the people who are reading our review, how much do we want to speak to the, like, hey, I don't really like Zelda games, but here's my opinion on the most recent one.
F you! Like people who have Zelda tattoos are like, I don't want to read this crap.
Yeah. So I think ultimately, and that's not to say that, I would love to read a Zelda review by Berts, by the way, but I think it comes down to if you're weighing those, if you look at it as a binary situation, which it's not, but if you look at it like that, I think it's better to err on the side of going with the enthusiasm rather than.
So James Smith from Scotland writes in exactly that, saying, how do you decide who reviews games? And so the conclusion is erring on the side of enthusiasm, but making sure they're not a blind zealot for this crap.
I think that's ideal.
Yeah.
Somewhere in the middle, you want someone who, I think in an ideal situation, you want someone who is familiar with a series history or a developer's history or a genre history. And, all of those things, or maybe one of those things is enough. You know, like sometimes you don't necessarily want someone who's for everything so deep in the weeds that they can't speak to the idea of like, hey, I've played a lot of RPGs before. Should I try? I don't know what Persona's about. Should I try Persona? Versus someone who has played and loved every Persona game. You know?
Sorry, so you made it through one point. It's an opinion. Did you have more things?
Well, we're getting into a lot of them. There are lots of little bits here and there. Another formal one is the one that we talked about on the podcast last week, which is like intros are really tricky.
Yeah.
But as a general rule, by the end of an intro, you want your reader to have some idea of whether or not you liked the game.
I love that. And I love with Chuck here, he's probably written 300 sites. He's freelancing at IGN by now. But at least when he wrote this email, I love getting down and into the nitty gritty with this stuff. Like second paragraph is always lower paragraph. That's a common refrain here.
Yeah.
How do you feel about second paragraph, lower paragraph?
That's another one of my tips.
Please.
Don't avoid the second paragraph story dump.
But is that just because we've done it so much? Like if you're freelancing somewhere, isn't it just a nice structure?
Nope. Here's my rule against, or like my reasoning behind that. It's not just avoid it because it's everywhere or whatever. It's ties into another point.
Please.
Which is this is just a weird image in my mind, and I don't know if it like translates as well into explanation as it does for me, but
it won't.
I think like when I play a game, a lot of elements, I kind of think of it as almost like a scale of pros and cons. And there are certain things about the game that are heavier or lighter, more important or less important, that like tip those scales in different ways. Right. So
slow down, Brainiac. Hey, I got it. No, keep going.
I'm not saying it's confusing. I'm saying it made me not a great image.
I got it.
So I think the best reviews are ones that lead with the heaviest stuff. the most important things about a game. So let's say that you're writing a review for a Street Fighter game. Your second paragraph isn't going to be like the Tournament of Champions is happening again, and the World Warriors gather.
That's right. Chun-Li showed up with her legs yet again.
You know, I mean, fighting games are. I mean, obviously that's not the first thing you'd want to talk about, but I think it illustrates that point well. It's like in a fighting game, the story is a pretty light thing on that scale.
Yeah.
So you don't want to lead with that. And similarly, I think that when you're talking about, let's say, I don't know, I think for things like, let's say you're playing a first-person shooter, the story and setting is going to be important, but that's not always the first thing out of the gate that you want to talk about. Maybe if you're talking about a Call of Duty game, you really just want to talk about like how tight the gunplay feels and how explosive the like cinematic moments are. And then maybe that's when you start folding in some of the context around what's happening and why.
Yeah.
You know, like ultimately coming out of the intro, I like it when that second paragraph makes a big impact in terms of conveying what sets this game apart and why it's good or bad.
Yeah, for sure. Are there certain other tips you would give for words to avoid?
Oh man, I have so many of these.
There's like visceral, obviously, which is overused, but that was overused like 10 years ago. So maybe it's rebounded by now. I remember Jeff Cork prides himself in, I think it was both the cover stories and reviews for all Lego games. He refused to use the word charming, which is a good one. Other things.
See, I'm not a fan of those rules, things like that, because I get that sometimes they're overused, but sometimes they're just the right damn word.
Sometimes Call of Duty is visceral. Okay, so what are your words then?
For me, it's not avoiding specific words as much as, well, okay, it is avoiding specific words, but not like that. Not making a rule that like I want to say charming, but I don't want to say charming.
So it's avoiding words like
else.
that?
Avoiding that. Avoiding.
I guess stop for a second. Why avoid that? What are you talking about?
Generally, I like to just keep sentences sort of clean and concise.
Hemingway-ish.
Which you wouldn't know by listening to me speak, but I try to write this way.
That's why you've chosen writing.
Yeah. Things. I'm trying to think of a good example. Like. The word that would come in a situation like, you know that I love you, versus,
thanks,
you know I love you.
Right.
Conveys the exact same thing, but that extra word is just doing nothing.
Great. Okay.
So get that out of there.
Yes.
Other things, I think, it's your review, your bylines on it, they know it's your opinion. Just say it.
Great.
Things like, I found myself, or I managed to. You just did.
Just kill it.
Like, I found myself in a dungeon. I was in a dungeon.
I found myself really enjoying the dungeons.
Yeah, I enjoyed the dungeons. Things like that.
Sure.
I think these are the rules that I make for myself, and I try to enforce on other people here at GI also when I can.
Do you realize you just did it there?
What?
You said, I think these are the rules.
Oh, I didn't even know that.
Okay, that's good. That's good. Other specific tips like that, just in word choice, sentence structure. People always talk about like dead sentence structure or something like that. What does that mean?
If you want to get down to the nitty gritty of it even more,
please
avoid starting things with like there is and there are. There are lots of power-ups to get versus you get lots of power-ups.
Why?
Or it's hard to illustrate without having a bunch of sentences in front of you.
Yeah.
But if you compare sentences like that, the sort of dead construction version and the rewritten version, you see the trend emerge that it's just a more immediate and more impactful sentence, I think.
Mm-hmm. Other very specific things?
Yeah. Present tense.
Present tense.
If you can, again, a sense of immediacy makes it seem like a lot more present and exciting. So if you're talking about a platforming game, you would want to say like, there's one boss fight where the boss drops barrels on you and you jump back and forth, rather than in one boss fight, the boss dropped barrels on me and I jumped back and forth. And
So you're writing it as if you're playing the game right now.
yeah, I mean, it sort of removes a lens. It removes just this layer of, suddenly you're not watching the action through like imagining it happening to someone else. You're imagining it happening to you right now.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, that's
Yeah.
helpful.
Yeah.
Anything else, or should I go back to your questions?
Let's go back to questions.
Okay. Kyle Heyman in Waverly, Iowa. Interesting. He says, defend your review scale, you cowards. But genuinely, why is 7 average on the GI review scale? I know that every site is different and it's important to be aware of the scale when looking at a review. However, I feel like this is really limiting for GI and potentially confusing for consumers. From the beginning of the year until I wrote this email, there are 64 reviews on the website. Who knows when this email is written. With a score of 7 or above and only 16 below a 7. There are literally fewer scores available to assign to a better than average game compared to a less than average game. It seems odd that you would actively choose to have fewer ways to quantify good games. Yes, the context of the review matters. Yes, the explanation matters. But as long as you tie a score to a game, that score, apart from all the context, also matters. So how was the decision made that a 7 should represent an average game? That's an old question.
Yeah. And that's also, I mean, truthfully, that decision was made long before I even started.
I think
here.
we talked about it in the History of Game Informer episode with
Yeah?
Andy and Reiner, I think.
So I can't speak to the origins of how that decision was ultimately made. I have been a steward of the system while that's been in place, I guess is the
Do
best.
you like the system?
I do.
Okay.
And I think
I
part of
understand the point, though. Like, you see a lot
Yep.
of 7.5, 7.75.
I get it. I get it. And especially if you're talking about, hey, your scale goes from 1 to 10, why isn't 5 average?
Yeah.
Like, I understand all those arguments. I think it helps me when I reframe the scale in my head as a standard, like, school grading scale, where 70% is a C, 80%'s a B,
Yeah.
90% is an A.
Well, what do you think from Adam Bistler in Raleigh, North Carolina? He says, hello, everybody. Recently, Polygon has switched to reviewing without a score, and Kotaku's been doing it for a while now. Will Game Informer ever stop giving a number-based score and give a tiered recommendation? Don't play, must play, etc.
I guess that ties into what I said before, too. I think the text is the important part of the review for me and not the score. I still put a score on it, and I still consider, like, give that the appropriate amount of consideration. I think we still do it because people still want it.
I love it. I love scores. I mean, I grew up with GameSpot. Like, I love having those scores memorized.
And I think that's it's a quick and easily quantifiable sort of way to get an idea of what someone thinks of a game.
Like, we know that Ratchet & Clank Up Your Arsenal is a perfect 10.
Hey,
It was given a 10. It's a good game. No doubt about it. Anyways. Sorry, this is just the trash.
this is this gripe about 10 hours.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, we can
and
do that.
Also, Paper Mario 1000 Your Door. I have some thoughts on that. I really like that game.
Oh boy, let's. I gave Metal Gear Solid 4 a 10 also, by the way.
That's right.
So,
Well, look, I love that game, but come on.
Yeah.
Come on. Let's get realistic here.
So yeah, I mean, ultimately, I don't see the score going anywhere for us because I think people still like it, and
Yes, I agree.
I understand. I mean, nothing against the sites who have decided not to run it and to focus more on other sorts of discussion. But yeah.
Yes. What do you think about the simple don't play, must play? Basically, the don't play, rent it, buy it structure. Isn't that kind of cool?
I want more nuance than that.
Well, there's also text or words.
No,
or
but I mean, like even in terms of the score,
yeah.
like let's say on that scale, if something gets an 8, that's probably that's a play it.
Yeah.
Right? But then a 9.5 is also a play it.
A 9.5 is like, no, you need to have that, oh my God, play it now.
Okay, well, what's a 9 then?
Well, everyone knows it's a play it.
So then
it needs to be that, that there are those games that burst into that next stratosphere of like, Jesus Christ, like a God of War, right?
Yep. I mean, I get so you do that. I guess the point I'm trying to make is that, let's say 8 and 9 are both play it's. That's not a gap there's no gap in their score. But for me, when I have limited time to devote to something, and let's say that there are 2 games that are roughly in the same category of things that I would like, but one's an 8 and one's a 9.
Sure.
I'm probably going to be more interested in the higher scoring one. Of course,
right.
this is where you actually do research and actually read reviews and don't just look at scores.
Right. You look at Metascores.
But yeah, okay. Oh boy.
Do you like Metacritic? It is a helpful tool, is it not?
Yeah. I think Metacritic is a helpful tool for consumers that has been weaponized against game developers a little bit, and I don't like that part of it.
Right. Nick Anguiano from San Diego, California. He says, oh, this is current. Anthem has got me thinking of the actual usefulness of a review of a game as a service. Take Rainbow Six Siege, for example. It launched to mediocre reviews. Berts gave it a 7, but is now one of the most popular online shooters out there because that game is dramatically different than how it was at launch. I would argue that if Berts were to review that game today, probably at IGN or whatever, he would probably score it higher than a 7. Are reviews for games as a service even useful? Has this conversation ever come up at GI? This is a crusade.
Yeah. I think to answer the explicit question, I think reviews for games as a service are useful for when the game comes out. Mm-hmm. In the same way that when any game comes out, there are going to be people who are curious about it and reading reviews and wanting to know the state of it, right?
That's why we print all the games of service reviews in the magazine on disappearing ink, which I think is very helpful.
But I completely acknowledge the issue there of, I mean, in my own personal experience, a game like Assassin's Creed Odyssey, which I gave an 8.25 when it came out. And if you look at that game a year later, like I think it's substantially better.
Even Unity.
Unity's another is a whole different beast. So like those are cases where going back to those reviews 6 months, a year later, I know that they're not representative anymore. And that's a conversation that we've been having here for years at this point in terms of how we
someday we should do something about
how
this.
we adapt to that. And we've I guess that's all I can say about it at the moment, other than like, of course we're aware of it and those conversations are happening, and we would like to address that in the best way we can.
There we go. Jason from West St. Paul wants to know what difficulty people review games on. And do you coach anybody for like, just play it on normal, you idiot?
I think normally it's normal.
Yes.
I think when we review a game, the purpose... Well, not the purpose, but the experience that we should try to evaluate is sort of the baseline one that the developer tuned for just normal players coming into it.
Yeah. Thomas from Laguna Hills, California says, reviewing games, when you're reviewing games, do you ever worry that your scores, though fair, might keep people from discovering titles that might speak to them despite their flaws?
I think that's where the text comes in again too.
You're right.
Something
Read the
like
text.
And this is another one for me that I've caught some flack for, but I gave Nier Automata a 7.75.
That's right.
Which, if you just look at that score, you think, well, that's a average to slightly above average game. But if you like in the text, I still think it does a good job balancing the positive and the negative.
Uh-huh.
But I really try to convey, like, this is a game that when it's firing, it really does a lot of cool and interesting things that I highly recommend you experience if you're into this kind of stuff.
Right.
But that doesn't necessarily offset all of the stuff that I had problems with. But it's really worth checking out for these things for these people.
Right. Like you said, the soundtrack was too good. I remember you dinged it for that.
Yeah, exactly.
Alex Hanovan says, hey, Ben and company, whatever happened to second opinions?
Yeah.
It's a Game Informer thing where we had multiple people that review games back in the day.
Yeah. The very short answer to that is we don't have the time for them anymore.
Uh-huh.
And they just were too similar all the time.
Yeah.
And we are not... I think it was Matt Helgeson who came up with this phrasing for it years ago, and I really liked it because it completely captures the approach for me. Is we're not going to manufacture dissent.
Right.
I'm not going to put someone on a review to say, hey, you be devil's advocate on this, because then that's not their opinion. That's just them manufacturing some sort of argument that runs counter to the main review.
Right. And maybe that'd be fun in video form, but written,
yeah. And also, mainly we just don't have the time for that. Who's going to have two people play the same game through these days?
What are you talking about? The office is bustling. Luke Chambers from Indiana says, how often do you read other people's reviews of a game after you've written a review of it? Or do you generally avoid reading other people's reviews?
I always avoid reading other people's reviews before I write mine.
Yeah. What about, like, you're on Twitter, right? Mm-hmm. Laying out that heat, dishing some gossip. Yeah. What if you see people just pop up in your timeline of like, oh my God, this game is the second coming of Christ? Isn't that a factor?
See, for me, it has less to do with knowing whether or not other people are liking the game as much as it is the specific things that they talk about and the ways that they talk about them. Mm-hmm. So remember, I think it was last year, there was that plagiarism thing going on with Dead Cells, right?
Oh yeah.
Remember that?
That was fun.
Like, that was obviously plagiarism. Mm-hmm. But it also made me nervous because how often do you read something or hear something and then just subconsciously, you hear 100%. Someone use a word and then later that day you use the same word.
Absolutely. That
you never used, but someone used it before. It's like just skimming the surface of your brain, right? There are unconscious ways that kind of stuff and those kinds of phrases can surface. And I just don't want to deal with any of that.
Right.
So that's what I'm more worried about, rather than getting my opinion tainted by, not that I'm some legendary figure here, but I'm pretty confident in my ability to like or not like a game, regardless of whether or not other people like or don't like it. What I worry about is the way I articulate it, and I don't want to unwittingly take that from anyone else.
Right.
So, and I instruct other GI editors to also not read other people's reviews before they publish them.
You actually over and unplug the Ethernet cable from the computer at work, which is pretty drastic.
But after it goes up, I love reading other people's reviews.
Really? You like reading reviews?
Oh, yeah.
Huh. Do you edit other sites in your mind?
No.
Really? Mm-mm. That seems unlikely.
I guess that's not totally true. There are times when I read an intro and I'm just like, ugh, no, that one doesn't work for me. But I'm not getting paid to edit other people's reviews. I don't do that.
Here's a real question. After the layoffs here at Game Informer, several editors have written for other sites.
Yeah.
Have you read their reviews and do you notice I would have edited this, or they're writing differently because they're for another site now?
No. A good example is that Kyle also reviewed Indivisible.
Yeah.
And I read his review and liked it. And he and I agreed independently on a lot of points on that game, I think. The main thing about that is it just made me a little sad.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Because I think when you lose 7 editors like we did, I think that you're losing different perspectives and different voices that we'd otherwise have. So yeah, I missed reading Kyle's thing. That made me sad more than anything else.
Yeah. You don't miss just tearing his reviews to shreds?
No.
Okay. Eddie writes in, says, hope the day finds you well. Well, I'm Eddie from Tustin, California. Do you ever find yourself having to dig your heels in when it comes to other reviewers at GI? Would love some insight into how the scoring process works. Yeah, how often is there a big argument about reviews, review scores?
Yeah, I think that 10s are really the most contentious ones.
Yeah.
Like I said, there's no demand that a certain game needs to score a certain way.
Yeah.
So there's no digging heels in the sense that a reviewer wants to give it a 9, but everyone else is saying you have to give this game an 8.
Yeah.
I think where the digging heels comes in is after the fact when, let's say you give a 10, no one's ever coming, I guess the better way to describe it is, let's say that I give something a 9. Someone else would come in and be like, hey, I played that game. I really liked it. No, it's pretty good. I'd give maybe an 8.5, but no, I mean, we're about in the right area. You know, like that's seen as general agreement. But if I give something a 10 and someone else comes in, that 0.5 difference, if they say, oh, I'd give it a 9.5.
Right.
That is not seen as general agreement. That's seen as like,
you blew it.
Like, I would not have given that a 10, and let me tell you why.
Yes, exactly.
But, you know, I mean, I feel like we're all pretty secure in our opinions here. We kind of like throwing them around at each other. So, I don't know.
Trying to think. Yeah, trying to think of like last time was a big blowout. It's like it's pretty soft. It's like Jeff Cork, like I really like Link's Awakening. It was like, the review score isn't matching the text. Let's try and get that more in line.
Yeah.
Let's see. Robert Medina. Ooh, here's a current one.
Oh, the big blowouts do come in the end of the year discussions, though. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Anyway,
that's fun for the community to imagine.
Yeah.
So Robert writes in and says, fun for everybody. With the Blizzard backlash after the China remark, it had me thinking. Are video game journalists ever afraid to say an honest opinion on a game knowing the publisher could deny them early copies for review? Is GI afraid to say anything bad for cover trips? I know you can't give me a real response to not offend China's or GameStop's feelings. Thank you. Just kidding. How about this sticky wicket, Joe?
Yeah. I mean, I can understand where that question comes from.
Uh-huh.
I think I can say that we don't consider that, but I think that I can only speak for our outlet, right? And I think that we work with some great folks, like some great PR people out there who just understand the way this works, that it's nothing personal if the game that you're representing doesn't score well from us. That's just that's just the way this business works. And everyone that I've worked with generally seems to have a good understanding about that.
Do you feel like it's gotten better over the years? Because maybe people that are getting into the PR scene, they grew up as fans of video game websites and like they understand it maybe a little bit better than they did 15 years ago or so, whenever you started?
I don't know. I mean, it seems pretty consistent for me.
Yeah.
Like it has never been, for no game that I've reviewed, has it ever been a concern that like, oh, is this somehow going to be like sabotaging a relationship? That kind of thinking, I think, has been like, since I started, was pretty actively discouraged. Mm-hmm. So, but I guess, I think we also have the luxury of being who we are, and that people will come to us with reviews and with, you know, cover opportunities and stuff. I guess not having ever worked at a smaller outlet, I don't know if that would be a concern for someone else. But
right.
It hasn't been for us.
What about cover story trips influencing a reviewer's opinion at all? Like when you spend 2 days in a studio and you kind of soak in that world, like I'm playing Outer Worlds right now, you know? Mm-hmm. And it's like, oh, I know so much of the lore and the backstory of this world because I spent 2 days talking to the developers. And now I'm playing the game and it's like, I wonder what my perception would be of this world if I didn't have that knowledge.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess I don't know for sure how that would do it, or like how that might influence it. Mm-hmm. I guess it boils down to partially what I was talking about before, in that I would rather err on the side of knowledge and enthusiasm.
Right.
So if there's someone on staff who has like been on a cover story trip for a game, but they probably went on that cover story trip because they were particularly suited to write about that game. Yeah. You know?
Yeah, for sure.
So yeah, I guess I can't say for sure that it wouldn't have some sort of influence on it, but I guess I would rather err on that side than be like, well,
let's get the local idiot to review this one.
Exactly. Though I will say too, though, that I leave an open door for reviewers to recuse themselves if they feel like they are too close to a particular game. So sometimes there are times when people so like this happened with me and Final Fantasy 15, for instance. You know, it's like, because we spent more than just a couple days.
That's like a week at
We spent
Square,
like a week at Square Enix. And not only that, but like they showed us so much of the game, even off the record stuff that we like couldn't print in the story. Yeah. But like at that point, I felt like
I know stuff like enemies, like, this is an endgame thing.
There were major story points that were spoiled for me on that trip, to the point that I felt like I or Kim, who was also on the trip, wouldn't really be able to like review that game properly, because there would be a sense of like wonder and surprise that would just be totally gone from it.
Yeah.
You know? So people can come to me and say, like, I just feel like I know too much, or I'm too close to these particular developers or whatever. And then we find someone else for it.
Yeah.
But in cases where that's possible, I will always go and like talk to the person about it first too, to make sure that they're comfortable tackling a review like that.
Yeah. Okay. Don't use the word that. Reviews are opinions. Don't start sentences with there is, there are. Present tense.
Yep.
Let's see.
The weighing thing.
Weighing thing.
Heavy stuff
Second
first.
paragraph should be the meatiest thing there.
Yep.
What else are we missing?
The big one that we're missing, I think that's really important, is assess and don't explain. Don't be an instruction manual.
Interesting.
Don't tell me what the weapons are. Don't tell me what moves you have. Tell me the impact they had on your game. Tell me why you like those things.
And that's a common trap is, now here's how the multiplayer system works.
Very common.
Okay.
Yeah. And it's all about finding a balance, because you do need some of that mechanical stuff in there. You need to convey, for someone to understand why combat is cool or why story is cool, you need to convey something about the structure around those things.
Yeah.
But you don't want to just turn into the instruction manual that says these are all the moves at your disposal. Because that's not interesting to read about. It's best if that information comes out in the form of different examples, right? Like, I really liked the combat system. The enemies force you to use everything at your disposal, from sword swipes and fire magic to mounts and harpoons, or whatever, you know? So you give a sense of the variety and how things work, but then you're also talking about some aspect of the game, in this case, like the strategic variety of it that you liked. This is the thing the game does that sets it apart.
Yeah. Do you have in your mind, like, the best review you've ever written?
Oh, boy.
We can put the link to Quiet Man in the show notes.
Oh, yeah, no, I don't hold that up in my mind, really. I don't.
But do you have a feeling, as somebody who's never written a review, of that, like, this is a good review that I've written versus this is kind of technically a review?
Yeah. I mean, I have a sense, like, I guess I'd say one of the reviews that came easiest to me and felt the most natural to write was The Witness.
Oh, weird. I just started replaying that.
Yeah?
Yeah.
That was one. Normally a review will take me a full day or more to write, and The Witness, just writing that review just took me a couple hours.
So you just connected the dots easily in your mind.
Exactly. And
Okay.
yeah, it was just following that grid right through.
So you think if people want your example of what you think a good review is, check out your review for The Witness?
I haven't reread it in a long time. Maybe it's not that good. But but
right.
that was one that, at least as I was writing it, was like this. It felt like it was clicking together pretty well.
Yeah. Is there a favorite editor that you like to read the reviews or edit the work? Not that everybody else is trash, but number one in your mind, who do you think is the strongest? Come on,
no.
you coward.
No,
Come on.
I'm not gonna pick any favorites. I can say, like, because it's the truth is that there's different things about every person that I like reading, and that's not just a cop out. I mean, like, that's really the truth. You go, like,
what do you like about Jeff Cork's writing?
Jeff in particular has a good strength in separating the things that are important versus not important to talk about, and then finding interesting ways to frame those things, so it doesn't feel like a bunch of bullet points that he's going through. It feels like these are the most important things, and it's just sort of a natural, like, flow from one to the other. So
Jeff Cork's the best. Is that what you're saying?
If you're gonna put those words in my mouth.
Yeah. Cool. Any other pointers?
I think we went through all of them. I guess the final one,
as Columbo would say,
is that none of the rules are always applicable all the time.
Oh, Christ, you can't do that.
So what's important about them? I think it's important to follow them, which I try to do, but it's also important to know when you need to break them.
Right.
Follow them first and know why you're doing that.
Yes.
and be aware when you're sort of like veering outside the lines and have a good reason for doing that.
Right.
But don't, if there's a sentence that really conveys what you're going for correctly, don't delete it just because it starts with "there is."
Yes.
Like, sometimes you need to do that.
Right.
You make those calls.
Yeah.
But don't make those calls all the time, because then it just feels like sloppy writing.
That's true. Alex, intern in the booth, how would you review this discussion? Number in your mind. Hang on. He's giving it a 9.
All right.
Wow.
All
Buy
right.
it. Buy it today.
Must play. Oh, wait, no, it's not that good.
Yeah, it's not good. Nuts. That was just a clip from a larger show called The Game Informer Show. You can find it on iTunes, Google Play, or GameInformer.com. We take the fun opportunities and exclusive information from Game Informer magazine and boil it into a show that airs every Thursday with exclusive cover story information, developer interviews, a lot of fun stuff. So come love games with us.